In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless civilizations rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists an unwritten law that even the most ruthless species dare not break. It is not about territory, resources, or even survival. It is about something far more primal, something that transcends species, culture, and evolution itself, the protection of the young. Commander Zyxtharian had conquered 17 star systems, reduced 3 civilizations to ash, and earned the fear of entire sectors. His name was whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy as the embodiment of merciless efficiency. Yet on this day, as he stood before a small group of captured beings from a newly discovered world called Earth, the universe was about to witness something unprecedented. The humans had been causing trouble across the Outer Rim territories for months. Their ships appeared from nowhere, struck with impossible precision, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Intelligence reports painted them as a savage species, primitive yet cunning, dangerous enough to warrant immediate action. When Zyxtharian's forces finally managed to capture a group of these elusive humans, he expected to find hardened warriors, seasoned killers who had been terrorizing his empire. Instead, he found children. What happened next would be remembered throughout the galaxy not as another tale of conquest, but as the day the most feared alien commander in known space discovered that some lines should never be crossed, and that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology, their cunning, or their savagery. It was their capacity to inspire even their enemies to become better than they ever thought possible. This is that story. The detention bay of the Karvak Dominion warship Stellar Devastator hummed with the low vibration of massive engines pushing through hyperspace. Commander Zyxtharian's 6 eyes studied the tactical display before him, each pupil dilating independently as he processed the information. 3 months of cat-and-mouse games with these mysterious humans had finally come to an end. "Status report, Subcommander Vexnathi," Zyxtharian rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh blue lights of the command deck, and the ceremonial scars marking his victories stood out like silver lines across his angular face. Vexnathi, a smaller but equally intimidating member of the Karvak species, consulted her datapad with nervous precision. "Sir, we have successfully captured 7 specimens from the human vessel that was harassing our supply convoys near the Tertius Nebula. The ship was heavily damaged during the engagement, and we managed to extract the survivors before it exploded." "Survivors?" Zyxtharian's mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his kind. "These humans have been striking our convoys with surgical precision for 3 months. They've cost us millions of credits in lost cargo and at least 40 good soldiers. I want to know how such a primitive species developed such effective tactics." The subcommander's antenna twitched nervously. "About that, sir, there's something unusual about the prisoners. Perhaps you should see them yourself." Zyxtharian's eyes narrowed. In his experience, nothing good ever followed the phrase, "something unusual." He had been looking forward to interrogating the human pirates who had been causing so much trouble in his sector. Intelligence reports suggested they were a warrior species, possibly former military who had turned to piracy. The attacks had been too coordinated, too professional to be anything else. "Very well," he growled. "Have them brought to Interrogation Chamber 1. I want full biometric scanning, psychological profiles, and genetic analysis. These humans will tell us everything we need to know about their species' military capabilities." "Sir," Vexnathi hesitated, her blue-tinted carapace darkening with anxiety. "They're already in the detention block, but sir, I really think you should." "Enough," Zyxtharian's voice carried the edge of impatience. "I've been hunting these pirates for 3 months. Every convoy hit, every soldier killed, every credit lost weighs on my reputation. The High Command expects results, and I intend to deliver them." He strode toward the detention levels, his heavy footsteps echoing through the corridors. The crew members who passed him pressed themselves against the walls, giving their commander the respect and space his reputation demanded. Zyxtharian had earned his position through a combination of tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. He had never met a problem that couldn't be solved through the proper application of force and intimidation. The detention block was a sterile environment designed to break the spirit of even the most hardened prisoners. The walls were a pale gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the temperature was kept deliberately uncomfortable for most species. Holding cells lined both sides of a central corridor, each equipped with force field generators and automated defense systems. "They're in cells 1 through 7, Vexnathi reported, still carrying that strange note of unease in her voice. "We've kept them separated as per standard protocol for hostile prisoners." Zyxtharian nodded approvingly. Separating prisoners prevented them from coordinating stories or planning escape attempts. It was basic interrogation procedure, something any competent officer would implement automatically. He approached the first cell and activated the viewing panel. The force field shimmered slightly as the opaque barrier became transparent, revealing the cell's occupant. Zyxtharian stopped dead in his tracks. The human in the cell couldn't have been more than 15 years old by the physical development markers his implants were analyzing. The being was small, perhaps 5.5 feet in height, with the soft facial features that most species associated with youth. Short brown hair covered the top of its head in an unruly mess, and large brown eyes stared back at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. "What is this?" Zyxtharian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, this is what I was trying to tell you," Vexnathi said carefully. "All 7 of the humans appear to be juveniles. Our scanners indicate they're between the ages of 13 and 17 in human years." Zyxtharian felt something cold settle in his stomach. He moved to the second cell, then the third, then the fourth. Each one contained a young human, all showing signs of fear, confusion, and exhaustion. Some were sitting on the narrow benches provided, while others paced nervously. One, a female with long blonde hair, was crying silently. "This can't be right," Zyxtharian muttered. "Run the scans again. These readings must be incorrect." "I've run them 3 times, sir," Vexnathi replied. "The genetic markers, bone density, hormonal levels, and neural development patterns all confirm it. These are definitely juveniles of their species." The implications crashed over Zyxtharian like a tidal wave. The Karvak Dominion, like most spacefaring civilizations, had strict protocols regarding the treatment of young beings from other species. These protocols existed not out of sentimentality, but out of practical necessity. Nothing unified different species against a common enemy faster than the mistreatment of children. "How is this possible?" he asked, more to himself than to his subordinate. "The attacks on our convoys were military-grade operations, precision strikes, coordinated timing, advanced tactical awareness. These, children, couldn't have been responsible." He walked back to the first cell and studied the young human more carefully. The boy was wearing what appeared to be a modified flight suit, clearly too large for his small frame. There were patches and modifications that suggested extensive wear and amateur repairs. Most tellingly, there were no military insignia, no rank markers, nothing that would indicate formal training. "Tell me about the ship," Zyxtharian ordered. Vexnathi consulted her datapad. Civilian merchant vessel, heavily modified. The weapon systems were clearly aftermarket additions, and most of the modifications appeared to be jury-rigged rather than professionally installed. The ship's computer core was damaged in the battle, but what we could recover showed civilian navigation charts and personal logs rather than military intelligence. "Personal logs, what did they contain?" "The translation algorithms are still working on the human language, but preliminary analysis suggests they were. Well, they appear to be something called video diaries. The humans were recording their activities and experiences." Zyxtharian's mandibles clicked together as he processed this information. Everything about the situation was wrong. Professional pirates didn't keep personal video diaries. Military units didn't send children on combat missions. And civilian merchant vessels, no matter how heavily modified, shouldn't have been able to outmaneuver his patrol ships for 3 months. "Show me the tactical analysis of their attacks," he commanded. Vexnathi brought up a holographic display showing the locations and patterns of the human raids. Zyxtharian studied the data with the eye of someone who had been analyzing military tactics for over 2 decades. The attacks were indeed sophisticated, but as he looked more closely, he began to notice something else. "These aren't military strikes," he said slowly. "Look at the targets. They're not going after our military supplies or strategic resources. They're hitting food convoys, medical supplies, basic equipment shipments." "Sir." "And look at the timing. They're not trying to cause maximum damage or casualties. They're hitting convoys when they're most lightly defended, extracting specific cargo and leaving everything else untouched." Zyxtharian's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. They're not pirates. They're not soldiers. Then what are they, sir? Zyxtharian turned back to look at the human children in their cells. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that made him feel sick to his thoracic cavity. They're refugees. The word hung in the air between them like a condemnation. Zyxtharian had spent months hunting what he believed to be a military threat, only to discover he had been pursuing a group of children who were apparently trying to survive on their own. Bring up everything we know about the human homeworld, he ordered. Vexnath's fingers moved across her interface. Sir, according to our intelligence reports, the planet designated as Earth was classified as a pre-contact civilization. First contact protocols were still being developed when the Zelani Collective claimed the system. The Zelani claimed it? Zyxtharian felt his blood temperature drop. When? Approximately 4 months ago, sir. They declared the human homeworld as a source of primitive labor for their mining operations. The last report from that sector indicated they were in the process of processing the population. The euphemism hit Zyxtharian like a physical blow. Processing was the Zelani term for systematic enslavement, followed by the elimination of any population deemed unnecessary for their economic purposes. It was a practice that most civilized species found abhorrent, but the Zelani Collective was powerful enough that few governments were willing to intervene directly. These children, Zyxtharian said quietly, they're not pirates, they're survivors. He looked at the young humans again, seeing them with completely different eyes. They weren't hardened criminals or military operatives. They were kids who had somehow escaped the destruction of their world and had been trying to stay alive in a hostile galaxy. The raids on Dominion convoys hadn't been acts of aggression. They had been desperate attempts to acquire the basic necessities of life. The realization that he had been hunting children for 3 months, that he had fired weapons at them, that he had been trying to capture them like criminals, made Zyxtharian feel something he hadn't experienced in years. Shame. Sir, Vexnath's voice seemed to come from a great distance. What are your orders? Zyxtharian stared at the young human in the first cell. The boy was looking back at him with those large brown eyes, and despite everything he had been through, despite being captured by an alien species, there was still a spark of defiance there. These weren't broken victims. They were survivors who had somehow managed to evade some of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. How many children do we estimate were on that ship? He asked. The vessel was configured for a crew of 12, but with the modifications, it could have supported perhaps 15 to 20 individuals. So there are others, Zyxtharian nodded slowly. Others still out there, still running, still trying to survive. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. These weren't just any refugee children. They were refugees from a planet that had been destroyed by one of the Dominion's allies. In the complex web of galactic politics, that made them, at least partially, his responsibility. Sir, Vexnathi said carefully, the High Command is expecting a full report on the capture of the human pirates. They're particularly interested in learning about human military capabilities and tactical doctrine. Zyxtharian's 6 eyes closed as he considered his options. He could file the expected report, classify the humans as military prisoners, and turn them over to intelligence for interrogation. It would be the safe choice, the one that would protect his career and maintain his standing with the High Command. Or he could tell the truth. Vexnathi, he said finally, I want you to seal all records of this capture under Command Priority 7. Nothing gets transmitted to High Command until I personally approve it. Sir, that's highly irregular. The protocols clearly state. I know what the protocols state. Zyxtharian's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I also know that Command Priority 7 gives me discretionary control over sensitive intelligence operations. This qualifies. He took one last look at the children in their cells. 7 young beings who had lost everything, who had been surviving on courage and desperation, who had somehow managed to outthink and outmaneuver some of the best military minds in the sector. Have medical teams examine each of the prisoners, he ordered. Full health assessments, but treat them as refugees, not hostiles. Make sure they receive proper nutrition and medical care. Refugees, sir. That's what they are, Sub-Commander. And tomorrow I'm going to figure out what we're going to do about it. As Zyxtharian walked away from the detention block, he couldn't shake the image of those young faces from his mind. He had built his career on the principle that there were no problems that couldn't be solved through the proper application of force. But for the first time in his military service, he was facing a situation where force wasn't just the wrong answer. It was morally unthinkable. The great commander Zyxtharian, terror of the Outer Rim, conqueror of 17 star systems, had finally met an enemy he couldn't defeat: his own conscience. Sleep had eluded Commander Zyxtharian entirely. He stood in his private quarters, staring out at the stars streaming past as the asterisk stellar devastator continued its journey through hyperspace. The soft blue glow of distant galaxies did nothing to calm the storm of thoughts churning through his mind. The medical reports lay scattered across his desk, each one a damning testament to what these human children had endured. Malnutrition, stress fractures from living in artificial gravity that wasn't calibrated for their physiology, vitamin deficiencies, and the psychological markers of severe trauma. Dr. Kethmaran, the ship's chief medical officer, had been thorough in her assessment. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry. "Come," Zyxtharian commanded without turning from the viewport. Dr. Kethmaran entered, her tentacles swaying with the nervous energy that characterized her species when delivering bad news. As the ship's senior medical officer, she had seen the worst that the galaxy could offer, but something in her manner suggested that this case had affected even her professional detachment. "Commander, I've completed the comprehensive medical evaluations you requested," she said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones of her aquatic species. "I must say, this is perhaps the most disturbing case I've encountered in my 30 years of service." Zyxtharian finally turned from the viewport. "How disturbing?" Dr. Kethmaran activated a holographic display that showed medical scans and analysis data. "These children have been living in space for approximately 4 months, based on the bone density changes and muscle atrophy patterns. But, Commander, they weren't prepared for space travel. Their bodies show clear signs of prolonged exposure to inadequate life support systems." The hologram shifted to show skeletal scans. "Look at these stress markers. Their bones are actually reforming to adapt to inconsistent artificial gravity. The youngest, a female designated as Subject 7, shows signs of malnutrition so severe that her growth has been stunted. She's 13 years old, but her physical development is closer to that of an 11-year-old. Zyxtharian felt his stomach clench. "What about the others?" "Subject 1, the male you observed first, has been injured recently. Fractures in his left arm that healed improperly, suggesting they had no access to proper medical care. Subject 3 has scarring consistent with plasma burns, probably from trying to repair their ship systems without proper safety equipment." The hologram continued to cycle through scan after scan, each one telling a story of desperation and survival. "Commander, these children have been living on emergency rations for months. They've been breathing recycled air that was barely within acceptable parameters for their species. They've been making repairs to critical life support systems with salvaged parts and ingenuity." "They kept their ship running for 4 months with salvaged parts?" Zyxtharian asked, impressed despite the circumstances. "More than that," Dr. Kethmaran replied. "I've reviewed the technical reports from the salvage teams who went through their vessel before it was destroyed. Commander, that ship shouldn't have been able to fly at all, let alone maintain hyperspace capability." She brought up schematics of the human vessel. "Look at these modifications. The hyperdrive was held together with what our engineers describe as creative genius and blind luck. The life support systems had been rebuilt at least 3 times, each time using different components that shouldn't have been compatible. The navigation computer was running on processors that were originally designed for entertainment systems." Zyxtharian studied the schematics with growing amazement. "This is impossible. You can't create a functioning hyperspace-capable vessel using random salvaged components." "Yet they did it," Dr. Kethmaran said. "And Commander, they didn't just keep themselves alive. They thrived. The psychological evaluations show remarkable resilience and adaptability. These children have been through traumatic experiences that would break most adults, yet they've maintained group cohesion and continued to function as an effective unit." The implications were staggering. Zyxtharian had been in the military long enough to know that what these humans had accomplished was theoretically impossible. Professional engineers with unlimited resources and years of training couldn't have done what these children had managed with salvaged parts and determination. I want to speak with them, he decided. Dr. Kethmarin's tentacles rippled with concern. Commander, they're still in a state of psychological shock. The capture, the destruction of their ship, being separated from each other, it's traumatizing them further. Then we'll bring them together, Zyxtharian said. Have them move to Conference Room 7. It's large enough to accommodate all of them, and it's less intimidating than the detention cells. Sir, regulations clearly state that prisoners should be kept separated. Doctor, Zyxtharian interrupted, his voice carrying a note of finality. They're not prisoners anymore. They're refugees under the protection of this vessel and this crew. Dr. Kethmarin's bioluminescent patches flashed with surprise. Sir, I'm not sure the High Command will see it that way. The High Command isn't here, Zyxtharian replied. I am, and until I receive direct orders stating otherwise, these children are under my protection. An hour later, Zyxtharian stood outside Conference Room 7, gathering his thoughts. He had faced down enemy fleets, negotiated with hostile alien governments, and commanded respect from species that considered compassion a weakness. But the prospect of talking to 7 traumatized human children made him more nervous than any of those previous challenges. The door slid open, and he stepped inside to find the 7 humans clustered together at one end of the conference table. They had been provided with clean clothes and had obviously been fed, but they still looked small and vulnerable in the large room designed for military briefings. The oldest of them, a male with dark skin and intelligent eyes, stood as Zyxtharian entered. Despite everything he had been through, he maintained a protective stance in front of the others, particularly the youngest ones. I am Commander Zyxtharian, he began, then realized that his usual commanding tone was entirely inappropriate for this situation. I command this vessel. The older boy said something in the human language, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. The translation implant in Zyxtharian's head processed the words. We know who you are. Are you going to kill us? The directness of the question caught Zyxtharian off guard. No, he replied immediately. You are not going to be harmed. Another human, a girl with red hair and freckles, spoke up. The translator rendered her words as, Then why are we here? What do you want from us? Zyxtharian realized he was facing an entirely new situation. These weren't soldiers who understood military hierarchy and protocol. They weren't adult civilians who could be intimidated into cooperation. They were children who had been surviving through their wits and courage, and they deserved honesty. I want to understand what happened to you, he said, moving slowly to a chair several seats away from them. I want to know where you came from and how you ended up living in space. The humans exchanged glances, and Zyxtharian could see them communicating through subtle expressions and gestures. Finally, the oldest boy seemed to make a decision. My name is Marcus, he said through the translator. We're from Earth. 4 months ago, the aliens came and destroyed everything. The Zelani, Zyxtharian said, and he saw several of the children react with fear and anger at the name. You know them? Asked the girl with blonde hair, the one who had been crying in her cell. Yes, Zyxtharian admitted. They are allies of my government. The reaction was immediate and intense. The children pressed closer together, and Marcus stepped even further forward, his young face hardening with an expression that was far too mature for his years. Then you're working with the monsters who killed our families, Marcus said, his voice containing a rage that made Zyxtharian's combat instincts twitch with alarm. No, Zyxtharian said firmly. I had no knowledge of what happened on your world. The Zelani claimed your planet, but they told my government that it was uninhabited. Uninhabited? The red-haired girl stood up, her fists clenched. 7 billion people lived on Earth. We had cities, schools, families. How could they say it was uninhabited? 7 billion. The number hit Zyxtharian like a physical blow. Earth hadn't been some primitive outpost or struggling colony. It had been a thriving world with billions of inhabitants, and the Zelani had destroyed it all while telling the Dominion it was an empty planet ripe for development. Tell me what happened, he said quietly. The story that emerged over the next hour was horrific beyond anything Zyxtharian had experienced in his military career. The humans painted a picture of a planet under siege, of massive ships appearing in orbit and beginning systematic bombardment of population centers. There had been no warning, no demands for surrender, no attempt at communication. The Zelani had simply begun killing. Marcus, who had been 16 when the attack began, described watching his city burn from the roof of his apartment building. Sarah, the blonde girl, talked about being separated from her parents during the evacuation and never seeing them again. Tommy, the youngest at 13, had been in a school that was destroyed in the first wave of attacks. "We found each other at the spaceport," Marcus explained. "There were thousands of people trying to escape, but there weren't enough ships. The aliens were targeting the evacuation craft as they launched." "How did you get off the planet?" Zyxtharian asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "There was an old cargo ship," said Jake, a thin boy with nervous eyes. "The pilot was dead, killed in the bombing. Marcus knew something about flying because his dad worked on atmospheric shuttles." "You stole a ship?" Zyxtharian asked. "We saved ourselves," Marcus replied defiantly. "Nobody else was going to do it." The story continued with their desperate escape from Earth's atmosphere while Zelani fighters pursued them. They had made it to hyperspace through pure luck and Marcus's intuitive understanding of the ship's systems. Then had come 4 months of wandering through space, trying to stay alive while learning how to operate technology that was far beyond anything their species had developed. "We weren't pirates," Sarah said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "We were just trying to survive. We needed food, medical supplies, parts to keep the ship running." "Why didn't you try to contact someone for help?" Zyxtharian asked. "There are refugee organizations, humanitarian groups." "Who were we supposed to contact?" Marcus interrupted. "Every government we tried to reach either ignored us or tried to capture us. We intercepted communications talking about primitive humans and valuable specimens. Nobody wanted to help us. They all wanted to study us or use us." Zyxtharian felt a cold realization settle over him. These children hadn't been avoiding contact with civilized authority because they were criminals. They had been avoiding contact because every adult authority figure they had encountered had treated them as objects rather than people. "The attacks on our convoys," he said slowly. "You were very careful to avoid casualties." Marcus nodded. "We never wanted to hurt anyone, we just needed supplies. We tried to hit convoys when they were least defended, take what we needed, and leave before anyone got hurt." "How did you know which convoys to target? How did you plan your attacks?" The children exchanged another series of meaningful looks. Finally, a girl named Amy, who had been silent throughout most of the conversation, spoke up. "I used to be in the junior mathematics program at my school," she said quietly. "I was good with patterns and probability calculations. I analyzed your convoy schedules and found the patterns in your security rotations." Zyxtharian stared at her. Amy couldn't have been more than 14 years old, yet she had been conducting military intelligence analysis that had baffled his best strategic officers. "And the technical modifications to your ship?" he asked. "That was mostly Jake and Tommy," Marcus said. "Jake's really good with electronics, and Tommy understands mechanical systems better than most adults." Zyxtharian looked at the 2 youngest members of the group. Jake was 15, Tommy was 13. Between them, they had somehow kept a dying starship functional for 4 months using nothing but salvaged parts and ingenuity. "We all contributed," added Lisa, a quiet girl who had been taking care of the youngest ones. "Everyone had skills we needed. Everyone had jobs to do." As Zyxtharian listened to these children describe their survival, he began to understand that he was witnessing something extraordinary. Not only had they survived the destruction of their homeworld, not only had they escaped into space and kept themselves alive for months, but they had done it all while maintaining their humanity. They had taken care of each other, protected the younger ones, and even when forced to become thieves, they had done everything possible to avoid harming others. "Commander," Marcus said, drawing Zyxtharian back to the present, "what's going to happen to us now?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zyxtharian knew what regulations said should happen. These humans had attacked Dominion vessels, regardless of their reasons or their methods. They should be turned over to intelligence for debriefing, then processed through the criminal justice system. But regulations had been written by people who had never imagined a situation like this. "I don't know," Zyxtharian admitted, and he saw surprise flicker across several faces. Apparently they had expected him to have all the answers. "But I promise you this, you will not be harmed, you will not be separated, and you will not be turned over to anyone who wishes you ill." "Why?" Sarah asked. Why would you help us? We're nothing to you. We're not even the same species. Zyxtharian considered the question carefully. Why was he willing to risk his career, his reputation, and possibly his freedom to protect these human children? The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and profound. Because, he said slowly, in 30 years of military service, I have never encountered anyone who deserved protection more than you do. The conference room fell silent as the children absorbed this statement. Finally, Marcus spoke. What do we need to do? First, Zyxtharian said, you need to rest, eat proper food, and recover your strength. Then we need to figure out what to do about the other human survivors. Other survivors? Several voices spoke at once. Your ship was configured for 12 people, but it could have supported 20, Zyxtharian explained. That suggests there are other human children out there, still running, still trying to survive. He saw hope kindle in their eyes for the first time since they had been captured. We're going to find them, he promised. All of them, and then we're going to figure out how to give you back what the Zelani took from you. Marcus stepped forward and, in a gesture that transcended species barriers, extended his hand toward Zyxtharian. Thank you, Commander. Zyxtharian looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out with his own much larger appendage and carefully shook it. The contact was brief, but it sealed something between them that went far beyond military protocol or diplomatic convention. It was the beginning of an alliance. See, that would change everything. The neutral zone was a region of space that existed between the major galactic powers, claimed by none and governed only by the unwritten laws of survival. It was here that smugglers, pirates, and other outlaws conducted their business, far from the reach of civilized authority. It was also here that desperate refugees sought sanctuary when they had nowhere else to turn. Commander Zyxtharian stood on the bridge of the Asterisk Stellar Devastator Asterisk, studying the sensor readings as they approached the rendezvous coordinates. What they found was both better and worse than he had expected. Contact, reported Sensor Officer Crixnaleth. Multiple vessels on long-range sensors. Configuration suggests a mix of civilian and less reputable craft. Bounty hunters, Subcommander Vexnathi said grimly. They're already here. Zyxtharian studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing enemy positions. The situation was complex and dangerous. 3 small civilian vessels were clustered near an asteroid field, likely the human survivors. Surrounding them at a respectful distance were 5 larger ships that bore the distinctive modifications of professional hunters. Why haven't they moved in? He asked. Navigation Officer that Karen, who had become something of an expert on human behavior over the past week, offered an explanation. The children chose their position well, Commander. The asteroid field provides excellent cover and multiple escape routes. Anyone attempting to approach would be exposed to defensive fire from superior positions. So we have a standoff, Zyxtharian observed. The hunters can't approach without significant risk, but the humans can't leave without being intercepted. Sir, Communications Officer Zelthumer spoke up. I'm detecting multiple communication channels being used. The hunters are coordinating their positions and discussing strategy. Should I attempt to intercept? Do it. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. As his communications officer worked to break the bounty hunter's encryption, Zyxtharian called Marcus to the bridge. The young human had proven to be an invaluable source of insight into how his people thought and operated. Marcus, take a look at this tactical situation, Zyxtharian said, gesturing to the display. What would your people do? Marcus studied the holographic representation for several minutes, his young face intense with concentration. Finally, he looked up with a grim expression. They're trapped, he said simply. The hunters have them boxed in. If they try to run, they'll be picked off one by one. If they stay, eventually the hunters will figure out a way to dig them out. What about fighting their way out? Marcus shook his head. Those are civilian ships with minimal weapons. Against professional bounty hunters, it would be suicide. Sir, Zelthumer interrupted, I've broken their encryption. You need to hear this. The bridge speakers crackled to life, with alien voices speaking in trade dialect. Confirmed 16 specimens total, divided between 3 vessels. Market value estimates range from 50,000 to 200,000 credits per unit, depending on age and condition. Remember, the client specified live capture. Damaged goods bring reduced prices. The youngest ones are worth the most. Something about adaptation potential and training responsiveness. Zyxtharian felt his blood turn cold. They weren't talking about refugees or even prisoners. They were discussing merchandise. The casual way they referred to children as units and specimens made him want to open fire immediately. Marcus had gone pale as he listened to the conversation. "They're talking about us like we're animals," he whispered. "No," Zyxtharian said firmly. "They're talking about you like your property. There's an important difference, and we're going to make sure they understand it." "Sir," Vexnathi reported, "the hunters have changed formation. They're moving into attack positions." The tactical display showed the 5 hunter vessels beginning to converge on the asteroid field. The standoff was over. The hunters had apparently decided that the potential profits outweighed the risks. "Battle stations," Zyxtharian commanded. "All hands to combat positions. This is not a drill." The bridge of the Asterisk Stellar Devastator transformed as his crew prepared for battle. Blast shields slid into place over the viewports, weapon systems powered up, and the ship's defensive shields activated. Throughout the vessel, 347 beings prepared to fight for the lives of children they had never met. "Open a channel to all vessels," Zyxtharian ordered. "Channel open, sir." "This is Commander Zyxtharian of the Karvak Dominion warship Asterisk Stellar Devastator," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You are operating in violation of interspecies protection protocols. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came quickly from the lead hunter vessel. "Commander, this is Captain Atroc of the independent vessel Asterisk Profit Margin. We are conducting lawful salvage operations in neutral space under Mercantile Guild authorization. Your interference is not welcome." "Salvage operations?" Zyxtharian's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I was unaware that living beings qualified as salvage." "These are exotic specimens from an extinct world," Captain Atroc replied. "They have no legal standing and no governmental protection. Our clients have paid substantial fees for acquisition rights." "Captain Atroc, I'm going to explain this once, and I suggest you listen carefully," Zyxtharian said, his tone becoming deadly calm. "Those specimens are sentient beings under the protection of the Karvak Dominion. Any attempt to harm them will be considered an act of war against a Dominion vessel." There was a long pause before Atroc responded. "Commander, with respect, one Dominion warship cannot protect scattered refugees throughout the galaxy. Even if you succeed in driving us off today, there will be others. The contracts on these humans are too valuable to ignore." "Then I suggest you spread the word," Zyxtharian replied. "Anyone who harms a human child will answer to me personally." "Sir," Sensor Officer Crixnaleth reported, "the hunters are powering weapons. They're preparing to attack the human positions." Zyxtharian had hoped it wouldn't come to violence, but he had prepared for this possibility. "Target the lead hunter vessel. Disable their weapons and propulsion systems, but try to avoid casualties." "Sir, that's a heavily armed mercenary ship," Weapons Officer Gaxthelin warned. "If we open fire, they will return fire with everything they have." "Let them," Zyxtharian said grimly. "They'll learn the difference between hunting defenseless children and fighting a Dominion battle cruiser." The Stellar Devastator opened fire with surgical precision. Plasma bolts lanced across space, striking the Asterisk Profit Margin Asterisk-S weapon arrays and engine compartments. The hunter vessel's return fire was immediate and vicious, but their weapons were designed for intimidating civilian craft, not battling military vessels. "Minimal damage to our shields," reported the damage control officer. "The enemy vessel has lost primary weapons and propulsion." "Sir," Communications Officer Zelthumer called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from one of the human vessels." "Put it through." A young voice came through the speakers, speaking in accented trade dialect. "Unknown warship, this is Captain Jenny Chen of the vessel Asterisk Second Chance Asterisk. Are you really here to help us?" Zyxtharian felt his heart clench at the hope and desperation in that voice. "Captain Chen, this is Commander Zyxtharian. We're here to take you home." "We don't have a home anymore," came the reply. "Yes, you do," Zyxtharian said firmly. "You have a home aboard this ship for as long as you need one." The battle, such as it was, lasted less than 20 minutes. The bounty hunters had been expecting to overwhelm a handful of refugee children in salvaged ships. They weren't prepared to face a state-of-the-art Dominion battlecruiser commanded by one of the most respected military tacticians in the sector. 3 of the hunter vessels fled immediately after witnessing the destruction of the Prophet Margin S weapons systems. The remaining 2 attempted to fight, but their fate was sealed the moment they chose to threaten children under Zyxtharian's protection. "Sir," Vexnathi reported, "all hunter vessels have been either destroyed or driven off. The immediate threat has been neutralized." "Excellent. Begin recovery operations. I want every human brought aboard safely." The process of bringing the refugee children aboard took several hours. Each of the 3 human vessels was in worse condition than the last, held together through desperate improvisation and sheer determination. The humans themselves were in even worse shape. Dr. Kethmaran worked tirelessly as each new group was brought aboard. Malnutrition, exposure, injuries from living in inadequately maintained spacecraft. The medical needs were extensive and urgent. "Commander," she reported after examining the latest arrivals, "these beings are in critical condition. Another week in space and some of them would not have survived." Zyxtharian found himself in the ship's main medical bay, looking down at a human child who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. The girl was unconscious, her small body connected to various medical devices that were keeping her alive. "Her name is Rebecca," said the young woman who had introduced herself as Captain Jenny Chen. "She got sick 2 weeks ago, and we didn't have the medical supplies to treat her properly." Jenny was 19, technically an adult by human standards, but she looked exhausted and overwhelmed by the responsibility she had been carrying. Like Marcus, she had been thrust into a leadership role by circumstances that should never have existed. "She's going to be fine," Dr. Kethmaran assured them. "The infection was severe, but we caught it in time. With proper treatment, she'll make a full recovery." As the humans were integrated into the ship's community, Zyxtharian began to understand the full scope of what these children had accomplished. They had not just survived, they had created a functioning society in the void of space. Each group had specialized skills and responsibilities. They had maintained communication across vast distances, and they had never abandoned their commitment to finding and protecting each other. "Commander," Marcus approached him in the common area where the humans were sharing their first proper meal in months. "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "The 4 who were captured by slavers near Rigel," Marcus said. "Are we going to try to get them back?" Zyxtharian had been expecting this question, and he had already made his decision. "Yes." "It won't be easy," Marcus warned. "The Rigel system is controlled by the Syndicate. They don't negotiate and they don't give up valuable property without a fight." "Marcus," Zyxtharian said, placing a careful hand on the young human's shoulder, "I told you that you were under the protection of this ship and this crew. That protection extends to all of you wherever you are. Even if it means fighting the Syndicate." "Especially if it means fighting the Syndicate," Zyxtharian replied. "No child should be a slave, ever." That night, as the Stellar Devastator cruised through hyperspace toward the Rigel system, Zyxtharian stood in his quarters reviewing intelligence reports on Syndicate operations. The organization was one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in the galaxy, with connections to corrupt officials and military commanders throughout multiple sectors. Rescuing 4 children from Syndicate custody would be nearly impossible. It would require infiltrating heavily defended facilities, outfighting professional soldiers, and escaping with prisoners before reinforcements could arrive. The odds of success were minimal, and the odds of survival were even worse. None of that mattered. Zyxtharian had made a promise to these children, and he intended to keep it. More importantly, he had discovered something about himself during the past week. There were things more important than following orders, more important than maintaining political alliances, and more important than preserving his career. Some principles were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. As he prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous mission of his military career, Zyxtharian reflected on how much his life had changed since that moment in the detention bay when he first looked into the eyes of a human child. He had spent 30 years believing that strength was about conquest and domination. Now he understood that true strength was about protection and sacrifice. The great commander Zyxtharian, terror of the Outer Rim, was about to learn that the most important battles weren't fought for territory or resources. They were fought for the simple, radical idea that every child deserved to be safe. The Rigel system was a testament to the darker aspects of galactic civilization. 3 massive space stations orbited the system's primary star, each one a hub of illegal activity protected by enough firepower to challenge a small fleet. Slavers, smugglers, and worse conducted their business here under the protection of the Syndicate, secure in the knowledge that few authorities were willing to challenge such a well-defended stronghold. Commander Zyxtharian studied the tactical display with grim determination. Intelligence reports indicated that the 4 captured human children were being held on Rigel Station Alpha, the largest and most heavily defended of the 3 facilities. Getting them out would require more than military force. It would require cunning, precision, and a willingness to take risks that no sane commander would consider. "Sir," Subcommander Vexnathi said quietly, "I've completed the analysis of Syndicate defenses. Commander, this is impossible. The station has enough firepower to destroy a dozen ships our size." "Then we don't attack the station," Zyxtharian replied. "We infiltrate it." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was audacious to the point of madness. Rather than launching a direct assault, a small team would infiltrate Rigel Station Alpha during a scheduled prisoner transfer, locate the human children, and extract them before the Syndicate realized what was happening. "I volunteer to lead the infiltration team," Marcus said when the plan was presented to the humans. "I know how the others think, how they'll react in a crisis situation. You'll need someone who can communicate with them effectively." "Absolutely not," Zyxtharian replied immediately. "You're 16 years old. I'm not sending a child into a Syndicate stronghold." "With respect, Commander," Marcus said, his voice carrying the steel that had kept him and his companions alive for 4 months. "I'm not asking for permission. Those are my friends, my family on that station. I'm going to get them back with or without your help." The discussion that followed was intense and emotional. Every human on the ship volunteered for the mission, despite the obvious dangers. They had lived through the destruction of their world, survived 4 months in hostile space, and created their own network of mutual support. The idea of abandoning 4 of their own was simply incomprehensible to them. "You don't understand," Jenny Chen said, her young face showing a maturity that should have taken decades to develop. "We've already lost everyone else, our families, our friends, our entire civilization. These 16 people are all we have left. We don't abandon each other, ever." In the end, Zyxtharian agreed to include Marcus and Jenny in the infiltration team, but only after they underwent intensive training with his special operations specialists. The humans proved to be quick learners, adapting to alien technology and tactics with the same ingenuity they had shown in keeping their ships functional. The infiltration itself began 3 days later. Disguised as Syndicate contractors delivering equipment to the station, Zyxtharian's team made their way through layers of security that would have challenged experienced intelligence operatives. The humans, despite their youth and inexperience, performed flawlessly. "Target identified," Marcus whispered through the communication implant as they moved through the station's detention levels. "Cell Block 7, Section 12, 4 humans ages 14 to 17. What they found when they reached the holding cells was worse than anyone had imagined. The 4 human children had been subjected to medical experiments designed to test their adaptation potential for various types of slave labor. They were weak, traumatized, and barely conscious when the rescue team reached them. "Sarah, Tommy, Alex, Katie," Marcus called softly as they worked to override the cell's security systems. "It's Marcus, we've come to take you home." The rescue itself was almost anticlimactic. The Syndicate had never imagined that anyone would be foolish enough to attempt a rescue operation in the heart of their territory. By the time alarms began sounding, Zyxtharian's team was already making their way to the extraction point with 4 rescued children. The escape, however, was anything but easy. As soon as the Syndicate realized what was happening, every available ship in the system converged on their position. The Stellar Devastator found itself outnumbered 10 to 1, fighting a running battle through the Rigel system while protecting a shuttle full of traumatized children. "Sir," reported Weapons Officer Gaxthelin, "we're taking heavy damage. Shields are down to 30% and falling." "Evasive maneuvers," Zyxtharian commanded. Get us to the hyperspace jump point. Whatever happens, that shuttle gets away safely." The battle raged for 20 minutes that felt like hours. The stellar devastator used every trick, every advantage, every piece of tactical knowledge Zyxtharian had accumulated over 30 years of military service. They fought with the desperation of people who knew that failure meant more than their own deaths. It meant the continued suffering of innocent children. "Shuttle is away," reported the flight control officer. "They've made the jump to hyperspace." "Then so do we," Zyxtharian ordered. "All hands prepare for emergency hyperspace transition." The stellar devastator vanished from the Rigel system, leaving behind a furious syndicate fleet and the smoking wreckage of 3 criminal vessels that had gotten too close to a commander protecting his people. The reunion between the rescued children and their friends was emotional beyond anything Zyxtharian had witnessed in his military career. 16 human children, the last survivors of their species in this sector, were finally together again. They cried, they laughed, they held each other with the fierce protectiveness of people who had lost everything else in the universe. Dr. Kethmarin worked for hours treating the injuries and trauma inflicted on the rescued children by their syndicate captors. The medical reports made for grim reading, but all 4 would recover with time and proper care. "Commander," Marcus approached Zyxtharian in the medical bay, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You've saved all of us, not just the 4 who were captured." "You don't need to thank me, Marcus," Zyxtharian replied. "You and your friends have given me something far more valuable than gratitude." "What's that?" "A reminder of why I became a soldier in the first place," Zyxtharian said. "I thought I had forgotten what it meant to fight for something that mattered." Their moment of celebration was interrupted by the arrival of Sub-Commander Vexnathi, who looked unusually nervous as she approached. "Sir," she said quietly, "we've received a priority transmission from High Command. Admiral Korthmax wants to speak with you immediately." Zyxtharian had been expecting this communication ever since he had first decided to protect the human children. The High Command would have questions about his unauthorized actions, his failure to report for debriefing, and his attack on syndicate forces. The conversation would likely end with his court-martial and imprisonment. "Transfer the communication to my ready room," he ordered. "And Vexnathi, whatever happens, the humans are to be treated as honored guests aboard this vessel. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, sir." Admiral Korthmax appeared as a hologram in Zyxtharian's ready room, his massive frame and scarred carapace radiating the authority of someone who commanded respect throughout the galaxy. He was Zyxtharian's superior officer, and in many ways, his mentor. The disappointment in his 6 eyes was almost painful to witness. "Commander Zyxtharian," the Admiral began, his voice carrying the weight of formal disapproval. "You have exceeded your authority, violated direct orders, and initiated hostilities with Allied forces without authorization. Furthermore, you have failed to report for scheduled debriefing and have been conducting unauthorized operations in neutral space." "Yes, sir," Zyxtharian replied simply. There was no point in denying the charges. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Zyxtharian considered his response carefully. He could try to explain the circumstances, detail the genocide committed by the Zelani, describe the courage and resilience of the human children. But he suspected that words would not be enough to bridge the gap between military protocol and moral necessity. "Permission to show you something, sir." Admiral Korthmax gestured for him to continue. Zyxtharian activated his holographic display and began showing the Admiral the medical reports, the intelligence data about Earth's destruction, and the evidence of the children's remarkable survival. He explained about the Zelani lies, the bounty hunters, the syndicate experiments, and the network of mutual support the humans had created. As the presentation continued, Zyxtharian watched his superior's expression change from disapproval to surprise to something that might have been admiration. "These children," Admiral Korthmax said slowly, "they've been surviving on their own for 4 months, without any adult supervision or governmentua.